So we are in the 11.2 lecture worksheets. And this is the final macromolecule. So food is broken down into fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and we are getting into the details of proteins. So proteins, just like other polymers, proteins are natural polymers. They are made up of monomers. And so the monomer is called an amino acid. It actually has the name amino acid. And you put these monomers together, bond them together over and over and over again. And that's how you have a polymer. And instead of being called a polyamino acid, it is called a polypeptide because it's named after the bonds that connect the monomers. So that's different. We hadn't seen that before. Normally you have a monomer like ethylene, and when you bond it over and over and over again, you call it polyethylene. But this is named after the bonds. So it's called a polypeptide when you have a bunch of amino acids bonded together. And that's actually just level one of proteins. So proteins are much more complicated than, say, your synthetic plastic polymers like polyethylene, because the first level of just bonding the monomers together, that's level one of proteins. And that's where it stops for most of those synthetic plastics like polyethylene. But for proteins, there are 3 more levels above that in forming the complicated protein structures that are 3-dimensional and have functions that are very important for life. So those are biochemical processes that are maintained by these complicated proteins. Okay, so first of all, we have proteins in food. It's also in us. So every part of almost every living cell in your body has proteins. Those proteins are performing functions like catalysts, which are called enzymes. So an enzyme is a protein catalyst, and a catalyst speeds up a chemical reaction. So in biochemistry, in your body, in your human metabolism, there are proteins that are functioning, and that is how you function, is thanks to these proteins that are enzymes, and there are millions of them. And so they're large, they're small, they're mostly small, microscopic, submicroscopic, and you can't see them, but they are essential to every living cell and keeping us living. So one reason why you need to eat protein in food, whether it's plant-based or animal-based, is because you break down the protein for the raw materials. So remember, the human metabolism, the main purpose of eating 3 meals a day is to provide energy in the form of calories. So that's breaking the bonds, mostly of fat and carbohydrate. When you break those bonds, you get energy. And proteins, though, are slightly different. We don't eat proteins for the energy. So proteins we break down for the raw materials, specifically to get these amino acid monomers. So when you eat protein from a plant or an animal, it is also made out of, the proteins are made out of these amino acid monomers. And so your body breaks down the protein from their food and then uses those amino acid monomers to build proteins in your body. Okay. And so these amino acid molecules have this common structure, which starts with a central carbon. So the central carbon on this diagram is that C. Okay, so that's the central carbon, and there are 4 different groups bonded to that central carbon. There's a hydrogen. So this is always going to have a hydrogen. And these 4 groups can be in any directions. This hydrogen is at the top, but it can be bottom, left, or right. But generally, you're always going to put the hydrogen at the top so you can arrange the others on the sides. So one side is always going to have an NH2 group. So this is the NH2 group. That's called the amine functional group. Okay, and then COOH is always on the other side of it. That's also bonded to the central carbon. So this is COOH. Notice that it is another carbon with a double bond to an oxygen and a single bond to an OH group. Okay, so this is COOH, which we've seen before in fatty acid structures. It's called carboxylic acid. So carboxylic acid has a double bond oxygen to the carbon and a single bond OH. Okay, and then there's R. So R is a side chain. So this is the side chain. And I know it's pointing down, not to the side, and that's okay. These are all four connected to the carbon. But that side chain is the only part that is variable. So this is the only part that varies for the 20 different amino acids that we have in the human body. So all the rest of the monomer is exactly the same. The carbon, the hydrogen, the amine group, the carboxylic acid, that's all the same. Why this is called an amino acid is because there's an amine group and then the carboxylic acid group. So kind of put that together, amine plus carboxylic acid is how you got the name amino acid, because those are always part of this monomer structure. So what varies is the side chain, and those are why there are 20 different naturally occurring amino acids. That side chain is different. And so in the video, I mentioned that there are polar side chains. Remember, polar means that there's an uneven distribution of electrons in the structure versus nonpolar, which is an even distribution. Now, having the side chain be polar or nonpolar leads to that higher order of protein structure that allows for specific functions, why one protein does something as an enzyme catalyst and another one does not. It has to do with these specific side chains, which can be polar or nonpolar. Okay, and so just like polar or nonpolar molecules, these are portions of the amino acid molecule, and then become portions of the protein that are polar or nonpolar. Okay, so when looking at these four amino acids, look at the names are glycine, alanine, valine, and leucine. They are exactly the same in the central carbon, the amine group, and the carboxylic acid and the hydrogen. Notice that the amine group, which is NH2, is the same as writing it like this, NH3 plus. Okay. Another thing to notice is that carboxylic acid group, the carboxylic acid, which is COOH, can also be written as it is here as just COO minus. Okay. So how is this different? This NH2 is basically a hydrogen cation that's attached to NH2, making it NH3. Where did that hydrogen cation come from? It came from this carboxylic acid is COOH, and this is minus the hydrogen and the plus charge when it becomes COO minus. So this is basically equivalent. You can write the amine group NH3 with a positive charge, or you can write it NH2 with no charge. That's why it's written there. And then this carboxylic acid group can be written COO minus, that negative charge, or just COOH. But here it's written as COO minus. It's just moving a hydrogen cation over to the other side of the amino acid monomer. Okay, so these are exactly the same in the top part. What differs is what's in green, and that's the side chain. Okay, so that side chain is different for each of these. So let's now look at those side chains. So for valine, what is the side chain for the amino acid valine? So that's everything that's in green. So it's that CH and CH3, and then another CH3, and then that's attached, and that's the side chain. Okay, so you keep that bond up there from the CH. And so the amino acid, if you are given the side chain for this amino acid named serine, we could draw the structure of the entire amino acid molecule because we know the rest of the amino acid molecule is the same. So start with the central carbon, okay, put a C, and then put 4 bonds coming out of it, top, bottom, left, and right, okay? And so it doesn't matter exactly what goes where, but to just follow our same convention, I put the hydrogen group at the top, okay? On the left, I'm going to put NH2. So this is written as H2N because the bond is through the nitrogen. Remember, hydrogen can only bond to one thing. So hydrogen is not going to be bonded to that carbon if it's also bonded to the nitrogen. So this bond is through that nitrogen. And then on the other side of this carbon, you have the carboxylic acid group, which is COOH. And then you want to add the side chain. So when you're given that side chain, CH2OH, you just add it on there, and that's the fourth group. Okay, so that's the structure of that serine amino acid molecule. So when you take these monomers, these amino acid monomers, and bond them together, that's called a peptide bond. And in the process of bonding two monomers, one monomer, one amino acid loses a hydrogen, and the other amino acid loses a hydroxide, an OH group. Okay, so on this two amino acids, glycine and alanine, that you have to have one amino acid losing a hydrogen and the other amino acid losing the OH group. And so for these two, what happens here is that I'll circle in red, the OH group that comes off is coming off of that carboxylic acid, the COOH. So there's an OH group that comes off here. And then for the other amino acid is bonded through the amine group. So this is the NH2, and it loses one hydrogen. Okay, so you can lose either this top hydrogen here or the bottom hydrogen, but you only lose one hydrogen. So just pick one, either the top or the bottom. And so what happens is all the rest of it stays the same. So let's focus on all the rest of that, of the glycine molecule. So there's a carbon double bond oxygen, okay, and then there's a CH2, and then there's an NH2. So that is all still the same. All those bonds, all those atoms are all still the same in purple that I just rewrote over in purple. Okay, what's new though, and I'll do this in red, is this bond that forms. That's the peptide bond. Okay, so this bond is literally between this carbon and this nitrogen. Okay, so the other amino acid, I'm going to have all of this in blue. So everything is the same here. There's going to be a nitrogen with a hydrogen. So this is the nitrogen with the hydrogen. Then there's bonded to a carbon that has a hydrogen and a CH3. See, that's the same here. And then there's the COOH group, and that's all the same. So it's a carbon double bond oxygen, single bond to an oxygen OH. So what's different is that this is no longer the second hydrogen, but instead it has the bond forming to that other carbon, and that's now a dipeptide. So there are two amino acids bonded together in a dipeptide. And this is also including the OH group that's now bonded to the hydrogen. And so you've got this in red, the OH and the hydrogen, and that's the H2O, and you get one water molecule out of that. So this is circling what was lost, the hydrogen and the hydroxide from each amino acid. And then this will be the basis, the starting point to add on, just like an addition polymerization, you keep adding on one more amino acid, always to one side. Okay. So when you have continuing adding on more amino acids, the name of the polymer containing thousands of amino acids, that's called a polypeptide. It's not named a polyamino acid, but it's named after those bonds that connect those amino acids. Okay, sound good? We'll get back to the nutrition facts label because you really have now, we have analyzed every part of the nutrition facts label. So we'll get back to every part of that nutrition facts label, not just the calories. So let's first go through this top part, which is we have the micronutrients. That's the remainder of the raw materials that are needed for human metabolism. So just as there are the macronutrients that are needed for energy, that's the fats and the carbohydrates, and the proteins are needed for the raw materials. Micronutrients are needed for the raw materials as well. You just don't need them in the amounts as you do for the fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. You don't need them necessarily every day, but you do need them for proper human metabolism, which basically means you need them to live. So vitamins and minerals are these micronutrients. And so vitamins in general are organic compounds. What is an organic compound? It is not something that comes from Whole Foods. Organic compounds, by definition, is carbon containing. So anything carbon containing was either once alive or currently alive. You are a carbon containing human, so you are organic. So foods are carbon containing, those are organic. So the definition of organic, as far as grocery stores, that's a definition that we'll talk about in another lesson, but that there are not necessarily meaning that they have, no pesticides. Organic just means carbon containing as far in terms of chemistry definitions. So minerals are when you have ionic compounds, basically not carbon containing, the rest of the periodic table. So minerals are ions or ionic compounds. And so that's everything else on the periodic table that doesn't have the carbon. And so when looking at those minerals, there are macro, micro, and trace minerals. And those are categorized by how much of those minerals you need in your diet. So you need the most of those macro minerals, just like you need the macronutrients, you need these macro minerals. But again, these are smaller amounts than the macronutrients. You still need them every day. And that's because they are generally going to be excreted. So that's calcium, phosphorus, chlorine, potassium, sulfur, sodium, magnesium. Those, you basically, if you're eating a balanced diet, you'll get those just fine. You don't necessarily need them, but that's what a daily vitamin is about. A multivitamin will contain those macro minerals. Micro minerals you need in lesser amounts. And so you can actually not have to take those every day, maybe every other day, or in lesser amounts in that same daily vitamin. But also in general, having a balanced diet should cover those micro minerals as well as those trace minerals. So the trace minerals, even smaller amounts, you should recognize that micro. That's the metric prefix micro, which is 10 to the minus 6. So that's a microgram, or 10 to the minus 6 grams, compared to having a whole gram of those macro minerals. So the one trace mineral I mentioned in the video was selenium, that rice-based diets don't actually have enough selenium in there. So there's a need to take selenium for rice-based diets. And so trace minerals can become important when basically they're zero, when they're not part of the natural diet. So on a nutrition facts label, we know that it's required by law in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration to list these specific vitamins. So vitamin A, vitamin C, also the minerals calcium, iron, and sodium. And so though there might be other vitamins and minerals, these are the ones that are required by law. So these 5, one vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, and sodium. Yep, counted to 5. Okay, so that's why sometimes you'll see it listed that there's vitamin A and 0 grams, or vitamin C and 0 grams. That's because it's required by law to list those important minerals and vitamins. So when looking at this nutrition facts label, starting at the top, you can see that this is the old-fashioned, where you have calories and then you have calories from fat. So remember, we don't need to look at calories from fat. Calories are the same, whether they're coming from fat or from carbs or from proteins. Calories are all going into the same general caloric content. So the total fat, you can see that there's some saturated fat in there, not too much. So that's considered not bad. And there's no trans fat. So those are the unhealthy fats. And looking at the carbohydrate, So the total carbohydrate is given to us as dietary fiber. Remember, that's the cellulose that humans cannot digest. And so that's called fiber, even though it is a carbohydrate. It's made out of glucoses, but we cannot access those glucoses. Then there's the sugars, and there's no extra added sugars. So although there's a lot of carbs in here, these are, this is not the worst thing you could eat, okay, in just analyzing the top part. But looking at the bottom part, getting below this line gets us to the vitamins and minerals. So remember, what has to be listed is vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, and sodium. And sodium is up here above the line. And that's because people, it's listed above the line. It's important for individuals on a sodium restricted diet. Okay, so the vitamins that are present in this food, there's vitamin A. There's also vitamin C. And vitamin A and C, these are organic compounds and carbon containing compounds. We'll look at those structures, I think, in the next worksheet. So these are the organic compounds. And then the minerals that are present are the sodium. There's 160 milligrams, there's the calcium, and then there's the iron. Because remember, sometimes, so the sodium, that's Na, calcium Ca, and iron is Fe. Sometimes it's listed calcium, but you'll see 0%. That's because it's required to list those minerals. And then let's see if there's any other minerals in here. There's no other minerals listed in here. So the percentage values, this is percent daily value. And in comparison to like when we calculated the percentage of fats, percentage daily value becomes important, in particular looking at the vitamins and minerals, and that's how much is needed daily. How much of that daily requirement is met? And so if you are only eating this food today, then you'd only have that your needs for those minerals and vitamins. That's all below the 100%. But this assumes that this is not the only food you're going to eat today. And so this is why sometimes you can really start paying attention to your vitamins and minerals and see if you need to take an additional supplement, some multivitamins. So when you have a diet that's lacking in the proper nutrients, but you have enough of the calories. So this is enough energy. That's what that means when you have enough calories, but not the right nutrients. That's malnutrition. Mal meaning wrong nutrition. Okay. So when you have not enough nutrients or calories, so that's not enough nutrients or calories. So you don't have enough of the calories, you don't have enough of the energy, or the nutrients are the raw materials, well, then you're talking about a problem. Now, most of us in developed countries don't have that problem, but this is undernourishment. Okay, that's basically not getting enough food is typically going to be undernourishment when you don't have enough energy or raw materials for supporting human metabolism. Okay, so that is hopefully getting you to understand the everything on that nutrition facts label.